Welcome to Stress-Free Solutions with Sarah. I'm your host, Sarah Elise, a stress management and fitness coach, advocating the world to trust their gut more often. I discuss various ways to manage stress and share personal stories of guest experts who have gone through the same stressors as all of you at home. Hey there, super moms of the universe. Let's play a game called hide and seek. No, not with your kids or that mysteriously vanishing left sock. It's time to seek out you in the everyday hide and seek of life. Introducing Mastering the Soul System, a 12-week journey to reclaim your time and energy. This course is your gateway to finding balance, energy, and joy in every aspect of your bustling life. Picture this, 12 weeks where the words mom and mayhem don't always go together. Rediscover yourself with every breath in our Soulful Mind Weeks. Sing out loud in the shower or car, off-key is absolutely fine, and dance during our Soulful Body sessions, and embrace the quiet whispers of your heart in our Soulful Spirit adventures. It's about time your spirit got a front row seat, don't you think? Join us on this journey. Embrace the harmony between being a dedicated mom and your personal aspirations. Mastering the soul system, because darling, in the noise, find your silence. And maybe, just maybe, a bit of that elusive thing called me time. You deserve to thrive, not just survive. So come on, slide into our world at www.livewellenhanceyou.com/soul system. Your journey back to you starts now.
Acoustics pioneer John Stuart Reid is an acoustics physics scientist and inventor of the CymaScope. He is on a mission to educate and inspire the world about the fields of cymatics, the science of visible vibrations and sound. He asserts that sound is the foundation of almost all matter in the universe and was a potent force in the creation of life in the primordial oceans, therefore carrying the power to heal life. His CymaScope invention has forever changed the world's perception of sound by giving us the ability to see sound and better understand the ubiquitous aspect of life. His cymatics research, which is elevating this important new field in scientific and medical arenas, includes a study on differentiating between the sounds emitted by healthy cells and cancer cells, published in the journal Water. I am so grateful that John is with us today. You know, I love to bring in people from all walks of life who've experienced stress just like you at home, but have made transformation in their own life. And in this case, developed a really cool invention. So I can't wait to talk to John. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for that really wonderful and comprehensive, oh my goodness, comprehensive introduction.
Yes, I think people need to understand exactly what this is because they might have never heard of a CymaScope before. What made you decide to develop such an invention?
Well, it's a long story. I'm going to try to keep it as short as possible. This is actually my second career. I've had two careers. The first career was of an acoustics engineer. I had an acoustics consultancy business that ran for 30 years. And towards the end of that time in my life, I visited the Great Pyramid with my daddy, who sadly is no longer with us. We were great friends as well as father and son, but we shared a lot of common interests. And one of those interests was Egyptology. We had visited Egypt several times before this particular event occurred in early 1996. We were able to enter the Great Pyramid of Giza, Cairo, without anyone else there. I think what happened was that we were towards the end of the morning session because they sell tickets for the morning session and then a whole new set of tickets for the afternoon session. We must have been toward the end of the morning session. And everyone that had wanted to go in had been in and gone. And so there we were all alone in the Great Pyramid, which was, quite an experience. So one of the things that I had always wanted to do was to lie in the sarcophagus. This is a box of granite, rose granite, so it has a kind of pinky to it. And it's very resonant. If you were to strike it with the side of your fist, which I have done, it's a little bit naughty, nevertheless. As an acoustics engineer at that time, I was fascinated by the resonant properties of that granite box. So anyway, if you do that, if you strike it with your fist, it rings like a low-pitched bell. It's a beautiful sound, very deep, but very resonant, very rich sound. And so I knew that sarcophagus had very special qualities, and I wanted to lie in it and make sound with, my own vocal sound. And I did that, Sarah, and what happened was really life-changing, actually, because in that one little experiment that I did, at some particular vocal pitch that I guessed at the time was somewhere over 100 hertz, I now know it was actually a bit higher than that. It was 117. Just in the moment, I thought, this is somewhere over 100 hertz. Every cell in my body felt like it was tingling, and goosebumps broke out all over my flesh. It was really quite extraordinary. It was a little bit like an orgasm, if I can give you that analogy. Very powerful and amazing feeling, actually. And so I played with that vocal pitch a little bit. I went just above it and the effect stopped, and then I came below it and the effect stopped. So there was this, what I call the Goldilocks zone, this pitch that really set my whole body alight with energy. And so there and then I pretty much decided that I would have to go back to the pyramid, but this time armed with acoustics instrumentation, to discover what is this amazing mechanism, and was it designed by the Egyptians, or is it just pure chance that it happens, it's happening. Anyway, so that's the kind of introduction. And then so I went back this same year. Actually, I gained permission to go back later in 96, and I carried out a series of very standard acoustics experiments. One of them was pretty extraordinary. Just very briefly, I was with the antiquities inspector in late 96. He was standing there watching me, making sure I didn't do any damage to the sarcophagus or anything. And at one particular pitch, this time, instead of me lying in the sarcophagus, by the way, I had a small speaker placed there, so I could make sound speaker from an electronic oscillator. And at one particular frequency, one particular tone, the whole sarcophagus began to beat like a heart. Boom, 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 just like that. And that was like, oh my God, I again got goosebumps.
Yeah.
I thought, wow, I really didn't expect anything like that to happen. I now know exactly why it happened, from an acoustics point of view. But also, there's another long story that we won't have time to go into today, but concerned with Egyptian rebirth. So Egyptian rebirth concerns the fact that the pyramid is designed as a rebirthing machine. Actually, Dr. René Friedman, the famous Egyptologist, said that the Great Pyramid is a resurrection machine. In other words, the pharaoh is reborn, essentially, in the pyramid, right? Well, there's a long story attached to these, what I call beat frequencies, boom, 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 that actually relate to rebirth symbolism. For example, just very quickly, I could say, instead of having that speaker there in the bottom of the sarcophagus, you could have the pharaoh lying there making sound, right? And then you have to have another frequency to set the sarcophagus going with these beat frequencies. So then you have like 4 or 5 people standing around the sarcophagus making their own vocal pitch, but just slightly changed from the pitch that the guy in the sarcophagus is making, right? And that's when the magic would happen. So in other words, it could have been possible that the ancient Egyptians had actually contrived this, and all related to rebirth. But that's another very long story, like I say. However, because in 96, late in 96, I didn't have time to carry out a cymatics experiment, therefore I gained permission to go out again in 97 to create this cymatics experiment. Essentially what it is, cymatics, it's very simple science. It can be quite complex, but the basic principles are very simple, which is that whenever sound is present and a membrane is present, then there has to be a pattern, a cymatic pattern, imprinted on that membrane, invisible to the naked eye. But I liken it, Sarah, to if you pick up a glass with your finger and thumb, say, and though you know that your fingerprint or your thumbprint will be there on the glass when you put it down, you've got to look really hard to see it, right? If you didn't know it was there, you wouldn't even know, you wouldn't see it. If you sprinkle on some fine powder, like talcum powder, sure enough, there it is, very big and bold, right?
Right.
So it's a similar principle with sound and a membrane. All membranes are exhibiting patterns, cymatic patterns, all of the time whenever there is music or any kind of sound involved. And the same, by the way, is true of every membrane in your body. Every cell in your body has a membrane. Right? We could talk about it later because that's really all part of one of the mechanisms by which sound does indeed have healing qualities, very deeply healing qualities. But that basic principle now with sound on a membrane, you can make that pattern, that cymatic pattern visible simply by sprinkling on some powder or some revealing medium, for example, sand, which is what we used that day. We gathered some sand outside the pyramid. They got lots of sand in Egypt. And we just brought some sand in, and then we used a cappuccino chocolate shaker, literally, to sprinkle sand on the membrane. And then the experiment would be able to show, we'd be able to make visible then the resonant properties of that sarcophagus so that I could understand more about that very special Goldilocks frequency that had caused that amazing effect in my body. But the gift, all of this, Sarah, was that 3 weeks before going out to Egypt in 97, I quite badly injured my lower back. And that turned out to be a great gift. You know, at the time, I didn't think of it in that way. I thought, oh my goodness, I've been so silly. I picked something up at an angle and I was tired that day.
Always
and,
that.
you know, basically strained the muscles in my lower back. Now, what happens whenever you have a spinal injury, the muscles in that area go into a spasm. This happens automatically. And in medical terminology, it's sometimes called the splinting cycle. This is basically a way that the body naturally protects the site of the injury. In other words, it's like a kind of cramp. You know, I'm sure you've had a cramp.
Yeah.
Everybody at some point has had a cramp. It can be really painful. And what happens when you have a cramp is that your muscles are lacking oxygen. They're in what's termed a hypoxic situation. There's not enough blood flow in the muscle. So the muscle goes into a cramp. When that happens, because the muscle is tensing, it actually squeezes out even more blood and the cramp intensifies, and actually the pain as well intensifies, as you will well know. It's a similar kind of thing with the splinting cycle. The spina erector muscles, in this case in my lower spine, were in extreme tension, really spasming deeply, in order saying to John Stuart Reid, you will not move your lower back because the body wants it to heal. And so you will not move it. And by golly, there's no way I could. It was extremely difficult that day to get into the pyramid because the ascending corridor is only about 4 feet high. So you can imagine me with this splint up my back, natural, trying to get in great pain. And actually, I didn't even know whether I would be able to conduct the experiments. Such was the level of the pain. When you have a very severe pain, you just can't think straight in the turmoil with the pain. Anyway, I took probably way too many analgesic pills to try and mediate that pain, just so that I could do a little bit of work. And I managed to get myself in, and the antiquities inspector helped us set up the experiment. Well, what happened was so extraordinary. I mentioned about life-changing the year before. This was absolutely life-changing. Why? Because ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs began to appear in the sand that we had sprinkled on the membrane.
What?
You cannot make it up. This is true. And I've got all authoritative evidence to prove it, right?
That's so cool. That would blow my mind, though.
The very first hieroglyph that appeared is the hieroglyph, what's called the Djed pillar, D-J-E-D. And it's actually the jed pillar is the backbone of the god Osiris, right? This is an actual hieroglyph, and that's what it means. Backbone of the god Osiris. Well, Osiris is actually very strongly connected to the Great Pyramid. So that was a real big surprise in the first case, just seeing it manifest. And by the way, Sarah, it wasn't static. It was snaking and writhing just like a snake would, Oh my God, it was really quite something. And the antiquities inspector, he was absolutely stunned as I was.
Yeah.
And so then he was now wanting to help. Initially, he'd been standing up against the north wall, filing his nails as I was setting up. And I think he thought I was a bit nuts, actually. But now he rushed across when he saw this happening. He said, "Hey, how you do that? What can I do? Can I help you?" So he was now wanting to help to actually get engaged with the experiment. It was quite cute, actually, the way he was going on. Anyway, so he did help. And so then he would be scraping the sand off and sprinkling more fresh sand on. And then I would be operating the controls. And then a whole series of different hieroglyphs appeared after that first jed pillar. It was like Ra, the sun god, is a circle inside a circle, like concentric circles. That appeared. The Shah loop appeared, which is the symbol for protection, and so on, all these amazing hieroglyphs. And about 20 minutes into this experiment, this extraordinary experiment, I suddenly realized, Sarah, that there was no pain in my lower back. All the pain had just completely vanished. And in that moment, I thought to myself, I know what's going on here. I'm very excited because seeing these ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, therefore I'm experiencing a peak moment. And whenever we experience a peak moment in our lives, endorphins flow into our bloodstream. These are natural opioids. They have the effect of making us feel euphoric, but equally, they also mute pain. This is literally how morphine was discovered, because it happens naturally in the body, but only when you're having a peak experience, right? So I thought the pain is being masked. I didn't have time really to focus on that whole idea at the time. I just thought, okay, I'm fortunate that I can carry on without pain. And I really believed that the pain would come back when I eventually got back to the hotel, but the pain never did come back. So I realized that something really important had happened. This was a mechanism that could be important in medical science. So that was an important result of this. But also the fact that we had seen these ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs manifest on an ancient Egyptian sarcophagus, that said to me, hey, this could be a new tool for science. If it can do that, what else can it do? And so that's the journey that I've been on ever since then. So it's a long journey, more than 25 years. First, to develop the CymaScope instrument, which is a new type of scientific instrument that makes sound visible. We're not using sand on a membrane anymore, by the way. We're using now pure water is the revealing medium, and it's exquisitely sensitive to the surface of pure water, exquisitely sensitive to vibrations, to sounds of any kind. And then the other journey that I've been on is understanding the biology in relation to sound frequencies and music in particular, and how it is that sound frequencies and music support our health and also mediate pain, which is something that obviously I was extremely interested to learn. How had that happened that day? So that's the journey I've been on ever since, and it's been a fascinating journey. And of course, also, I changed my occupation. That event led me to go back to the UK, start my business, which took 2 years to wind up, by the way. It's never quick to wind up a business, and then start a new career in science. And so I've been an acoustic physics scientist ever since the year 2000, really, when it started with my scientific work.
So interesting. I've never heard of anything like that, by the way, in my life. And I'm a musician. I don't know if I did tell you that. So that was another thing that drew me in to your story and understanding how that works, because I'm sure the acoustics in there, I'm curious, like what you have found with acoustics and the pyramids. I'm sure there's a connection with that too.
The connection that perhaps we should be talking about initially here is that pain. How was that pain mediated? Because so many people in the world are taking pain medications, popping them like M&Ms, and
Yeah.
they're not good for the body in the long term. Analgesic pills, painkillers, are really good for helping people to get through a period of acute pain, and that's what they're designed for. They're not designed for people that have chronic pain, where you've got pain that's lasting for weeks or months or even longer. If you take a lot of analgesics on a long-term basis, you're going to really affect the longevity. You're not going to live as long in your life if you start poisoning your body with these analgesics, right? Great for the short term, no good for long term.
Right.
So I realized that if we could unravel this mystery and find how was that pain completely banished within only 20 minutes, when no amount of analgesic pills had actually been able to control it to any great degree, I was still in extreme pain, even though I'd taken several of these analgesic pills before going into the pyramid. So the story that I'd like to share first, if I may, is how we ultimately discovered what the mechanism was by which that pain had been miraculously or seemingly miraculously banished. And it's a story that begins with Professor Sung Chul of Rutgers University. And he came here to support the work that I was doing, which at that time was focused on human blood and exploring the potential for music. I didn't know that you were a musician, Sarah, but this is really a wonderful story. I'm sure that you will love this story. And the potential for music to extend the lifespan of red blood cells, basically. Red blood cells have a very distinct life cycle. In the body, eventually, of course, they die, like many types of cells do, and eventually they are mopped up and replaced in the body. But one of the interesting aspects to blood that I was particularly fascinated to learn was about blood that's in a blood bank, where blood is stored in a blood bank. They only can store it for usually about 4 weeks. And after 4 weeks, they have to discard it. Very sad that they have to do that. So I was interested as well, not only in the qualities of music in terms of extending the lifespan of red blood cells in the body, in the vivo environment, but also in blood bags, in blood banks, because if we could extend the lifespan of blood in a blood bank, wow, it would really be a game changer in the world. Because if you could extend it to, say, 6 weeks or 8 weeks, can you imagine the difference that would make, Anyway, so we set off on this journey together, Professor G and I, to work through these experiments. And what we found, it took several days to develop the protocol, by the way, the nuts and bolts, if you like, of how to run the experiment. But then once we started, it was actually very plain sailing. It was an easy experiment to run. And I just very briefly describe it for you. When the blood arrives here from the blood bank, it arrives usually in test tubes rather than in blood bags. And we would take, say, a test tube of whole human blood and decant it into 2 smaller test tubes and warm it as well, because it arrives chilled, by the way. So we would warm it to normal blood temperature. One of these little test tubes goes into what we call the Faraday cage, which is a small room in the lab here that is electromagnetically screened. And it's also very, very quiet in there. It's designed to be so. And this is like the control experiment in the Faraday cage. In there, there's a little incubator so we can keep the blood nice and warm. It's in this quiet environment and it doesn't get any electromagnetic field in there at all. The other little vial of blood goes into, actually, we've got it right on the bench here now. Coincidentally, this is actually because I just ran an experiment using this a couple of days ago. It's still there. So this is the other little incubator. We put the other vial in there, and in there we would place a small speaker. I don't see there's not a speaker in there at the moment, but we would have a small speaker so we can play music to that blood, right? And then we would do a test with what's termed an automatic cell counter. This is a device, unlike the old days where you had to look down a microscope and literally count the number of cells. You don't have to do that anymore. It's all done automatically by an automatic cell counter. So we would be able to count the number of viable red blood cells from the control vial in the Faraday cage. We take it out of there and do a measurement with that. And then the same with the blood that's being immersed in music for 20 minutes. And again, this 20 minutes, because it was 20 minutes to heal my lower back in the Great Pyramid. And I don't think Professor Sung-Chul Ji knew that information. But anyway, he told me that the optimal time for immersion of music with the blood would be 20 minutes. So we used that same period of time. And the results, Sarah, were amazing right from day one. Every genre of music that we tried classical music first, and then a whole series of other popular genres, but all the genres created significant increases in the viability of the old red blood cells. When the blood comes to us from the blood bank, even though whoever it was that donated the blood would be just literally the day before, right? So say it was a guy or a girl who would give their blood, they would be paid for it. It's a way that it's actually when donors provide blood for science, they're actually paid, to give their blood. So we would pay, for this blood to be sent here.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it arrives just the day after they've given the blood, still, if we do a test with the automatic cell counter, we find that there are millions of dead red blood cells, right? These would have been mopped up in that person's body by the normal processes, but here we have them arrive here, dead red blood cells. Millions more that are healthy and well, and then millions more that are classed as medically old. What that means, Sarah, is that the outer membranes are kind of losing their beautiful shape. The red blood cell shape is a gorgeous shape with a little dish in the middle. It's really beautiful to behold. But now they're not so beautiful when they're old. They're all breaking up and look a little bit strange. And what's happening is the outer membrane is starting to lose its integrity. It's starting to break up. And anyway, so that's the situation. When music comes along, it makes those old red blood cells new again. It literally regenerates them. We hoped that we would see something like this, but we never expected what we actually saw, which was significant increases in this viability. This is the ratio of the dead red blood cells to the living red blood cells within only 20 minutes of immersion. It was incredible.
Yeah.
Even more surprising, and this was a really important result that took us on the track to understand how my lower back had been healed, is that classical music provided the poorest result. And Professor G and I, we both love classical music. Actually, I love many different genres of music, but we often play classical music in our home here. I really genuinely believed that it would provide the best results. Somehow, my intuition is usually right, but in this case, it was not. Actually, popular music outshone classical music every time we tried it. So there was something very important to learn here. And it turns out, cutting a long story short, that it's the bass beat of pop music that's driving the healing mechanism, right? And this brings me back to think about that experience in the Great Pyramid and the boom, 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 that's another story. But yes, the bass beat, and how we came to the conclusion initially that it was the bass beat is because we went away and we'd had lunch and we were talking about how this might work. And one of the ideas that we had was, well, maybe it is the low frequencies in popular music because classical music tends not to have much of a bass register. I know that there are certain pieces of classical music that can be very bassy, like 1812 Overture or whatever, but most classical music really is mainly mid-range and upper frequencies. So we had this idea just over lunch, and then to test it, what we did was to put some blood into the CymaScope instrument. By the way, this is a new model portable CymaScope instrument here. This is not the instrument that we used in those experiments, but the scientific CymaScope instrument has a frequency response that starts at 3 hertz, very, very low frequency. So we thought, well, okay, we'll put some blood direct into the CymaScope instrument. So instead of putting water in, which we normally would do, we put blood in. And we then injected a very low frequency tone was actually 44 hertz, very low frequency. That's lower than even the bass baritone in an orchestra can make with his voice. Very low frequency. And it produced a beautiful cymatic pattern on the surface of the blood, which we expected. But what we didn't expect was then we took the energy away. We actually just brought the fader down on the audio mixer, and by golly, the pattern just stayed on the blood like we hadn't done anything. We were really, what? How is that possible? Because usually with cymatics, Sarah, you have, let's say you've got a small volume of water, which we would normally have in a CymaScope instrument. There you've got a little container of water, trillions and trillions of water molecules all moving about in their own little Brownian motion. In other words, there's no particular order. They're just doing their own little thing, moving about with the temperature of the water, whatever it is. No organization, in other words. As soon as you put music or any pure sound frequency into that water, in a blink of an eye, all of that disorganization becomes beautifully ordered, right? And this is the power of sound frequencies and music, and it does it super fast within a tiny fraction of a second. Beautiful order. And you see this beautiful cymatic pattern. A little bit, if you haven't seen cymatic patterns, anyone watching this, you should look them up online. And cymatics is spelled C-Y-M-A, by the way. And it looks very like a rose window, for example, you might see in a cathedral. This kind of, circular and very symmetrical and very beautiful. And so that's what we would normally expect to see. And indeed, when we put this low frequency tone into the blood, that's what we saw, a beautiful pattern. But then as soon as we took the sound away, the pattern remained. And this was the big clue. Because it turns out that the mechanism that makes that happen is the low frequencies in the sound, in this case, pure tone, cause the pressure of those low frequencies, cause the oxygen that's already dissolved in the blood that came from this donor, whomever it was, the day before, right? The last time that person took their breath, respirated, just before the phlebotomist took the blood out of his or her arm, because we never know who the blood comes from.
Right.
Just that last breath oxygenated the blood in their bloodstream. They then take it out with a syringe and put it into the test tubes. We get it. So when it arrives here, it's engorged with oxygen, but it's very dark red. It's like a dark maroon color, right? And it turns out that the reason it's so dark is because there's no pressure in that test tube of blood to cause the oxygen to bind to the hemoglobin molecules in the red blood cells. You have to have pressure. Where does that pressure come from in your body? It comes from your heart. Every time there's a heartbeat, that is a pressure pulse of low frequency sound that causes the binding of the oxygen to the hemoglobin. With every beat, boom, 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 the binding happens.
Yeah.
And this is how your tissues in your body are fed with oxygen, because every heartbeat has this effect. In popular music, it's very similar to a heartbeat, isn't it?
Yep. Beats per minute. That's why they have the
So what we were seeing in the CymaScope instrument was the same effect. It was a low frequency sound, low frequency tone, causing the hemoglobin to bind to the oxygen that was already dissolved in the blood, right? And creating, wherever we had prior, we had this dark maroon colored blood, suddenly becomes bright scarlet, really bright scarlet, right? And then when we took the sound away, the bright scarlet pattern just remained in the blood. We were like, oh my God. It was an amazing moment. But this is how we knew what the mechanism ultimately was that had healed me. It's a long story, but the essence of it is that my lower spine was in spasm as I entered the pyramid, because my body was saying, you will not move your lower spine. We are trying to heal your lower spine. And this is a mechanism by which that occurs. It's a hypoxic situation in the muscles of the spinal muscles. If you put low frequency sound into those muscles, you are actually causing oxygen to be made available now. So instead of having a hypoxic
Okay.
environment where the
Yeah.
muscles are in tight spasm, suddenly you've allowed them to relax and release. And you see, most of the healing in my lower back had actually already occurred naturally, but the splinting cycle was still holding fast right to the last minute, sort of thing. And so when I produced the low frequencies in the pyramid that day, that is what caused the oxygen to be delivered to those muscles and allow those muscles to now relax. And when they relaxed, the pain just vanished, basically. That's the short version of that story, how it was that I left that pyramid without pain. So much so, Sarah, I was actually able to help break up the equipment and carry it out. And I felt great that day.
Yeah.
And it took a long time for me to eventually learn the mechanism that had caused that healing that day.
Oh, that is fascinating. I know also the vagus nerve regulates also what is happening inside our body. So whenever things tighten up, then our vagus nerve that communicates to our gut and our brain can also get affected. And is this also how this helps stimulate whatever is going on in your body during that time of the cymatic experience?
Well, actually, it's great that you mentioned the vagus nerve system because there's a connection here with exactly what I've just been referring to
Yeah.
with the CymaScope. Because we had a filmmaker came here a couple of years ago called Raz, R-A-Z. She's Israeli, a lady, and she's a really wonderful documentary filmmaker. She came here to film in the lab with these blood experiments and so on. And she came with Anders Holt, Holte, from Denmark, and his lovely wife, Kachina Miadu. They came here, they're musicians. Anders has this beautiful, rich voice, really deep, resonant voice, and a gorgeous voice. And Kachina plays these gorgeous keyboards. And so they actually performed a sort of mini concert to the blood that day. And this was all filmed, and it's in a documentary called The One Field, one with a numeral one, and you'll find it on YouTube, The One Field. And the result of that experiment was extraordinary because the difference between recorded music that we had been using in this little incubator here with a small speaker and the difference with the live music that Anders and Kachina were creating, well, there were so many red blood cells living after the immersion for only 20 minutes that the blood cell counter could not count them. Just too many, basically, right? Because it had its limits.
Yeah.
And so we knew then that was one of the wonderful things that we learned with that filmmaker came here. We learned that live music has astonishing qualities that recorded music unfortunately doesn't have. I mean, the recorded music was still producing like 15 or 18% increase in viability, which was pretty good, we thought, but nothing like the live music. The live music was, absolutely extraordinary. Anyway, so going on from there, what happened was just over a year ago now, every morning, Annalise and I listen to some of their beautiful music. They have an album called The Dream of the Blue Whale. It's absolutely so beautiful. And we very often listen to it at breakfast time. It's a really nice start to the day, right? And anybody watching this, by the way, that want to buy this music, because I would highly recommend it, you just go to andersholt.com, and Anders, Anders, and then there's a dash in the middle, and then Holt, Holte.com. You'll find the music there. This day, just over a year ago, I decided to look on the spectrum analyzer here in the lab at their beautiful Dream of the Blue Whale. And the reason I did it is because of the vagus nerve system. And so I'm really happy that you brought this subject up, Sarah. I had been doing a lot of reading about the vagus nerve system in terms of its amazing healing qualities in the body. One of the discoveries that had been made by many different researchers around the world is that for optimal stimulation of the vagus nerve system, you need very, very low frequencies. And I'm talking like 5 to 10 hertz, which is way below even what you can hear. You can only hear down to about 16 is the lowest note that you can hear, lowest frequency. So I'm talking here 5 to 10, which is even lower than that, right? And so I thought this day, well, I'm going to have a look on Anders' CD here, Anders and Kachina's CD, to see what is the lowest note that's coming out of that CD. I thought, well, intuitively, it must be healing because it just feels like it. We're sitting there having breakfast. It just feels so healing. And so I brought it down into the lab and I put it in the spectrum analyzer to look at it. And what I saw was absolutely extraordinary, that the lowest band on the analyzer is the 12 hertz band, and it was dancing merrily up and down with their album. And not only with Anders' voice, but also there are times on that beautiful album where he stops singing for a moment or two, and Kachina's keyboards, they carry on. And even with the keyboards, it was the same. 12 hertz dancing up and down. What that means is when you see that analyzer band dancing up and down at 12 hertz, it means that there are frequencies present about down to about 4 and 5 hertz, which is the optimal, one of the optimal frequencies for vagus nerve stimulation. So I got really excited to see this. And it's still a little bit of a mystery, actually, as to how this happens. These frequencies that I'm talking about, like down to the 12 hertz band on the analyzer, they're not on the CD. I need to make that clear. They're not recorded on the CD. They are made when the CD plays. And how they're made is what the effect is called heterodyning. And it means the mixing of two frequencies to create some other frequency, some new frequencies, right? So when you mix frequencies together, they create what's termed SUM and difference frequency. So in other words, some add together and some subtract. And in this case, we were getting the subtracted frequencies as the album was playing and creating these super low frequencies, which I knew were optimal for vagus nerve stimulation. And then what I did was I went up into our home, because where I am here in the lab, it's connected to our home. I literally in the mornings come out of bed down into the lab. Anyway, I went up into our home, brought down a whole bunch of albums to test. And the strange thing was, Sarah, that only a very small number of these albums had this effect. Many of them didn't have the effect. And that is still a little bit of a mystery. But what I want to share now is about the vagus nerve and how it optimally can basically reverse chronic inflammation, for example, when in mainstream medicine, there is nothing in terms of the pharmacological intervention that can, if someone has chronic inflammation, you go to a doctor, medical doctor, there's nothing that he or she can give you that will literally cure that situation. They might be able to give some substance like a steroid or something that would help you in the short term. But there's no cure. But reading all of these scientific reports on all of the research that are being conducted into vagus nerve stimulation, they're all saying you can reverse chronic inflammation simply by optimally stimulating your vagus nerve system. So this became very exciting to me to realize that if we simply applied high quality headphones, and they have to be high quality to get down to these kind of very low frequencies, high quality headphones with, say, the Dream of the Blue Whale music, and somebody had chronic inflammation, within quite a short space of time, maybe 2 or 3 weeks of therapy, that chronic inflammation would just die away, basically, and they'd be left back in a total homeostasis situation, no chronic inflammation, no chronic pain, right? So this is like, wow, an amazing discovery, really. And so I'm just talking very briefly about the vagus nerve system. When it leaves the brain stem, it first branches off to what they term the pinna of the ear, the outer part of the ear, sometimes called the auricle, sometimes called the pinna, same thing, but basically I liken it to parabolic dishes. You know how you have all these parabolic dishes pointing up to the sky to collect signals from satellites, for internet and so on. Well, or television. You can liken your ears to parabolic dishes that are collecting from the environment sound for two reasons. First, so that we can hear. If we're fortunate to have normal hearing, then these pinners are collecting sound from the environment so we can hear those sounds. Sounds go straight through the auditory canal into the tympanic membrane and then on into the cochlea. And in the cochlea, you have something called the organ of Corti, which has little cilia that basically sense the sound vibrations on a membrane and then send them electrically into the brain where they are interpreted as sound. And that electrical signal goes via the auditory nerve. I'm not talking here about the auditory nerve. I'm talking about the vagus nerve. And so it's very strange that what's happened here in nature, in evolutionary terms, Sarah, because the way nature has evolved all mammals, including humans, is that the vagus nerve goes straight to the pinna of the ear, the outer ear, right? So this is completely separate to the auditory situation. And that's why your ear is so sensitive to touch. If you touch your ears really gently, it's really a tingly kind of situation. And actually, it's an erogenous zone for many people. It's the same reason, because they're super sensitive. And the part where most of the nerve endings go when they leave the brainstem and go to the pinna is the tragus, this little flap of tissue that overhangs the auditory canal. That's where most of the nerve endings go, particularly on the inside of that tragus.
Yeah.
Right? Well, now you get the idea that nature has actually, it's like speaking to us. It's saying, if you wish to create homeostasis in your body, please optimally stimulate me with sound. That's what it's saying. Right? Nature has evolved this mechanism. So if you go back to kind of, let's say, very early hominids, cavemen and women and so on, where would the source of sound have come from? Well, it would have been the sound of wind in the trees, which is actually, it's called white noise. It's very low frequency, well, a very large span of frequencies, actually, including low frequencies. The sound of ocean waves breaking on the shore, the sound of whitewater rivers, the sound of speech, just creatures talking to each other, or animals roaring, or whatever, all these natural sounds are feeding in, not only so we can hear them, but feeding in and down into the vagus nerve system to give us what's termed in scientific terminology vagal tone. It means creating a homeostasis in the body by optimally stimulating the vagus nerve system. And as you pointed out a few minutes ago, it actually connects with all of the major organs in the body. So after leaving the ears, it goes to the pharynx and the larynx. Well, this is good news because it means we can vocally stimulate our own vagus nerve system. Maybe not entirely optimally, because there's no way we can get down to 5 or 10 hertz with this, but still any sound will help to stimulate the vagus nerve system. So even just like we are having a conversation now, that's helping our vagus nerve situation, the vagal tone.
Yeah.
So that's good news. Then the vagus nerve goes straight to the lungs. Well, this is good news because every time you take a breath, you're literally massaging your vagus nerve, right? And the way nature works is so wonderful, isn't it? And then it connects with the heart and all the other major organs, right down to the gut, and even the sexual organs, not directly, but indirectly, because the sex organs actually get their main stimulation via the base of the spine, but then those nerves branch into the gut where they meet the vagus nerve. So you can even get stimulation of your sex organs by stimulating your vagus nerve. It's an amazing system, and so many different medical conditions can be supported by optimal vagus nerve stimulation. So not just what I've shared about chronic inflammation, it's just really good news for everyone. And I believe it's one of the directions mainstream medicine will ultimately go in. And there are already signs that this is starting to happen. And the reason I say that with confidence, Sarah, is now a new medical term, and it's called music medicine. This is a new clinical term, right? So you will know that probably from the 1950s, music therapy has been a fairly major therapy. Actually, to become a music therapist, you have to earn a diploma. It's a 4-year course. And you have a therapist who helps patients in hospital settings. There's a bit of psychotherapy involved in the process as well. But basically, it's a very valuable occupation to be a music therapist. But what's happened now, all of these years later, is that clinicians have discovered that music has therapeutic power even without the psychotherapy part. So even though there's no therapist there with you to support you, just the act of listening to beautiful music through headphones is actually going to support healing in your body. And of course, one of the things, coming back to our work with music and blood, and now with the vagus nerve, the optimal situation, Sarah, would be for a patient to wear good quality headphones and listen to beautiful music that way. That's going to help their vagus nerve tone, but simultaneously to be receiving that same music through transducers, low frequency speakers, if you like, in the bed, in the mattress of the bed, that's going to produce these low frequency part of the music coming up through the bed into their body to support oxygenation of their body, at simultaneously receiving the vagal tone through the headphones. What a wonderful scenario that would be, you know. I visualize this for the future of medicine, and the fact that this new clinical term, music medicine, well, when I found that out a couple of years ago, I was really happy to see that happening, because, you know, that really do need medicine to change, to vary away from not an entirely pharmacological intervention, but to energy medicine, frequency medicine. And another good piece of news relating to mainstream medicine is frequency medicine in terms of light, because light, particularly infrared light, can be deeply healing. And now, if you go to a hospital with some kind of a dermatological situation, you've got some kind of a skin disease, they will give you light therapy. So this is a form of frequency medicine, isn't it? You know.
Yeah.
So
It's incredible.
It's
It's incredible what's out there. And man, I could go on and learn so much with you for hours. I wanted to ask you one last question. How has stress saved your life?
Wow, that's a good question. Well, it certainly changed my life completely. And that comes back to what happened for me in 97 with the Great Pyramid, because I was in extreme stress back in the UK, where after I injured my lower back, the part of the story that you don't know is that I had paid a lot of money to the Egyptian authorities to conduct these experiments. And now I'd done something really silly and injured my lower back. So I was highly stressed, right? So I was popping painkillers like M&Ms, but it really was hardly touching the pain. So I was in a lot of stress. And even on the day that eventually got to the pyramid and other people carried the equipment and so on, I was highly stressed. Getting into the pyramid was so difficult. And then only 20 minutes of making sound and all of that, not only the stress, but also the pain vanished as well, you know. So that was completely life-changing. And so stress, it began with stress that day, and it ended with sheer joy and happiness and a future that has completely changed my life.
And you also have something happening now. I know you currently have a course going on now. Could you share more about that? And also, you have something happening in July.
Right now, I'm hosting a course. It's called frequencymedicinecourse.com. So if you want to look up that course, frequencymedicinecourse.com, and it's currently happening. So if you wanted to join that course, you can. Obviously, you're joining not right at the beginning, but you can catch up with the replays, right? So there's that course. And then following on from that, in July, actually, there is an advanced course that I'll be teaching. If anyone's really seriously interested in frequency medicine, healing with sound and healing with light, I would suggest that they take the foundational course first. But you can take it at your own pace because obviously the modules are all recorded, right? So you can go through them at your own leisure time. And then if you really want to step up your knowledge, take the advanced course, but only after you've taken the foundational. And that's all on the Shift Network, who, by the way, I think are a wonderful bunch of people. They're all very passionate about what they do, sharing knowledge in the world. And so they have provided for me a wonderful platform to share the knowledge that I've acquired over this last 25 years or so, and now helping so many people to free themselves from pain naturally without taking analgesic substances and to heal from many different illnesses.
Well, I am so thankful that they connected me with you because you're incredible and the work you're doing is astounding. Seriously, I've never heard anything like this before, and I'm so excited to introduce this to my listeners. So thank you so much, John. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for all that you're doing to help spread knowledge, not only my knowledge, but other guests that you're having on your show. I'm really grateful to you, and I'm grateful to the Shift Network for making this connection. So thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Many blessings.
Take care, everyone, and remember to be kind to yourself and speak well to yourself on this self-love journey. Thanks to Dan Lieber at Beckett Brown Music for the intro and outro music. You can keep in touch with me on Instagram at Sarah Elise Coaching. If you're looking to improve your health and wellness, check out my business, livewellenhanceyou.com. While you're there, join the Live Well Enhance You email list and receive exclusive offers for our wellness programs and events. Until next time, take care.